my screen with y'all so you can see my PowerPoint. Oops. All right, everyone. My name is Jackie Metcalf, and I am the Executive Director of Texas Health and Environment Alliance. And tonight, you're joining us to hear about the Jones Road Groundwater Plume Superfund Site. And this is our last community meeting of 2020. Before we get into the presentation, just a couple of housekeeping items. Everyone's lines are currently muted, and at the end of the presentation, you will have the opportunity to unmute your line and engage, ask questions, share your concerns, make comments. However, if between now and then you think of things that you would like to share with us, whether they're questions, an observation, comments, whatever, you can drop that in the chat, and one of our team members will definitely address that for you. If not, bring it to my attention for me to address with everyone. Okay, so the Jones Road Groundwater Plume Superfund Site is located in Northwest Harris County. It is just north of 1960 on the east side of Jones Road. You can see it here on a zoomed out map. The red arrow is indicating the location of the Superfund site. For those of us that might live in the area or visit the area, this is actually ground zero for the Superfund site. It is a shopping center that has a lot of popular places within it and nearby. One of the really popular landmarks a lot of folks know about when we're trying to describe to them where this Superfund site is the Ace Hardware. I love Ace Hardware, and it is just across the street on the west side of Jones Road. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about where testing has taken place, a little bit about what's gone on recently with the Superfund site, what's going to be taking place in 2021, and where we fall. If you have missed our previous meetings or are kind of feeling a little not up to speed with some of the background on this Superfund site, you can visit our YouTube channel. In YouTube, you can search THEA Inc., THEA Inc., and find all of our previously recorded Zoom community meetings and town halls. And our last meeting, which was, I believe, in October, I actually took a deep dive into the complete history of this Superfund site. So just out of respect for folks who were on the line on that last time, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into 2020 and 2021. So what you're looking at here is a map from the EPA, and it is showing the blue arrows are indicating the direction of groundwater flow. The little circles, whether they are black and pink or black and yellow, represent well locations where they might be extracting vapors. They might be able to sample those wells. So there's different types of infrastructure that have been drilled into the ground, different types of casing for these different purposes. And I wanted to show you this map to show you that the most concentrated efforts when it comes to sampling and analysis have really been right there at ground zero. We're going to look in a minute at a bit of a wider view, but we've gotten several inquiries about, if asking if certain neighborhoods like Tower Oaks Plaza, if there has been testing of their groundwater for these contaminants. And so I wanted to show folks, where the most intensive testing has taken place. And this testing is for the dry cleaning solvents that make up this Superfund site, ranging from perc to vinyl chloride. And so there's several chemical compounds in between that perc breaks down over time and ultimately winds up at vinyl chloride, which is just as toxic, if not even more toxic than the original product perc. So you see here in this area where you see SVEO2, that stands for soil vapor extraction O2. It's just simply a well location. And that is where the dumping took place that makes up this Superfund site. And so that's in part why there's so much concentration when it comes to sampling going on in that area. You start at the heart of the problem and then go out from there to delineate the problem. And historically, groundwater withdrawal to the west, groundwater withdrawal within Cypress, has demanded that the localized groundwater flow go in a different direction than it normally would. Typically, our water beneath our groundwater, flows southeast, essentially out to the Gulf, right? And the demand to the west actually pulled the groundwater west for some time, which ultimately pulled these contaminants that are underground to the west. And so over time, the contaminants that were dumped right here at this in the corner unit of the shopping center were pulled this direction to the west. However, there has been some sort of shift. I don't believe it's completely understood what's changed, but if you live in the area, you know, and you pay a water bill, you know you're probably paying a fee for infrastructure for more surface water to be brought in. And so that probably plays a role in the shift in recent years towards getting more of the area on a larger percentage of surface water than solely groundwater, or even 80% groundwater. So we learned in 2020 that this shift was occurring and that groundwater was actually starting to flow back to the west and, back to the east and to the southeast. And so you can see that they were doing some testing here at all of these different locations to try to get a better understanding of at what depths these contaminants are. Okay, so now for a zoomed out visual for you. So right here by the blue arrow that crosses Jones Road, that is the Superfund site right there. And the blue arrows again are indicating the groundwater flow, and the red line indicates where there's a drilling restriction. So no new groundwater wells should be drilled within that red line. However, we found out this year that there are in fact new groundwater wells being drilled in the area. We're not surprised. We see this all the time where you have companies or individuals who drill wells and they simply are not seeking the appropriate type of permits, or they're not registering the wells with the state entities that they should be, because if they were taking those steps, they would be declined. They would be refused the ability to drill a groundwater well within this red area because of the known contamination in the area. And so we started looking at data for these different well points, and seeing here on this more zoomed out image, you can see there's actually a lot of monitoring wells within the area, and that's signified by these black and white circles. And that's what the MW stands for, monitoring wells. That's casing and infrastructure that has been put into the ground so that through time, the EPA and their contractors can visit those locations and sample the water, or some of these they can also sample for vapors. So we received about 400 documents of technical reports and a myriad of different types of documents related to this site through a Freedom of Information Act request, which we filed with the US EPA. And this year we received, like I said, about 400 documents. And so thank you to our technical advisor who's on the line. He and I have been going through this data, and he's been a great help and asset to our team. And he was looking at some of this data for the monitoring wells and saw that, you know, there were some levels of vinyl chloride being found in a particular monitoring well that was concerning, because it was basically like 0.02 parts per trillion away from what the government would take action to remedy the groundwater or to potentially change the drinking water supply if that were found in a public drinking water supply. So we're looking at this data and we're like, where is this? And so it was actually monitoring well 19 south. So this is where Jones Road intersects 1960. And it's just in that northeast quadrant of Jones Road in 1960. There is I believe it's a fitness connection. There's a fitness connection that is there in that shopping center. It's a large shopping center. And so it would make sense that, over time, the contaminants, as they have migrated underground and as they break down to that final product of vinyl chloride, that they, could have made their ways or their way, to the southeast, all the way even to 1960. And so what we're looking into right now is we're trying to figure out the historical land use for this shopping center. So we're trying to figure out, was there a dry cleaners there that maybe in and of itself was a polluting entity? Or is this truly the contamination from all the way up here from the Jones Road Superfund site? There's a chance that it is from this Superfund site. It's not that common for dry cleaners pollution from dry cleaners to make it all the way up to the federal Superfund level. There are programs designated to clean up and remedy dry cleaning facilities that have contaminated the land and water. And so I inquired with the EPA and I said, why this site? Why is this site on the federal government's national priority to clean up? And it's an orphan Superfund site, meaning the entity who did the polluting filed bankruptcy. And so the federal government's tax dollars that are going to actually clean this up. And I said, why this site? Why isn't it on the dry cleaning cleanup program? And they said, essentially, it's just that bad. The contamination is vast. The concentrations are very high, and there are direct exposure pathways. There's potential ways that people could be directly exposed from where these contaminants are. So the red line here represents that restricted area. And so that was put there because many of the homes within this area historically have been supplied by private groundwater wells, which there's no requirement for, an individual homeowner or even a business that has a groundwater well and, there's no requirement that they have to test for these chemicals or any chemicals at all. And so, what can go undetected, what people could potentially unknowingly be exposed to, there's definitely, a great potential there. And so one of the items we're looking at, finding this concerning data in monitoring well 19 down here by 1960 is that where it ends? And what type of data are we seeing between monitoring well 19 and ground zero of the Superfund site? So if we can look at the type of data we're seeing in between the two, it will also give us a greater indication of if this is contamination from the Superfund site. We're at a pretty critical point with the Superfund site in the process of the cleanup. So it's important that, our team continues to assess the data, look at what has been done historically, what we understand, and where the gaps are, what hasn't been done that needs to be done. For example, I mentioned just a little bit ago about the wells that are being drilled illegally. So, the EPA had no idea that was going on. And fortunately, stellar community members let us know, hey, this neighbor or this entity down the street drilled a well. I thought I was in a restricted area. And they're right. They are in a restricted area. And so the knowledge that the community members, that the people who live within this area, who know people within this area, bring to the table is crucial. Regarding the reference to the Tower Oaks Plaza, that is about it's between 1.5 and 2 miles northwest of the Superfund site. And I inquired with the EPA because it's definitely more north than you see this 9-foot marker here just above the red line. And the agency says that they have not tested in that neighborhood because these most northern monitoring wells, which would be monitoring well 14, have not tested, have not detected in their water any of these dry cleaning solvents. So essentially, like I said, you start here, you start at ground zero, right, with the most concentrated effort, and you go out from there. And when you find contamination, you should keep going. You should keep sampling and try to delineate how big this underground plume of contamination is. And so then when you don't find contamination, it's typically an indicator in sampling protocols that, you've reached the outer band of that plume. Okay, so I wanted to go ahead and discuss with you as we wrap up 2020 and are looking forward into 2021. I wanted to wrap up and talk about where we're going, what the path forward is. So when it comes to the EPA, they currently have a soil vapor extraction unit running continuously. This is a unit, I'll show you some diagrams in a moment, that was installed last summer, but actually 2019. So the idea when this system was developed and installed was that it would run for 2 years. However, experts that we work with are telling me that because of the concentrations and the extent of contamination underground, they don't believe that, the EPA has the estimate correct, maybe that it's a little short and that it's probably going to take longer than 2 years. So that will simply be determined by the sampling and monitoring and what they're reading in the different wells and what they continue to be able to extract from under our land. And so essentially this unit started in 2019 extracting vapors that are underneath our ground's surface. And like I said, the estimate is that it will run until the summer of 2021. So that's something that we definitely keep up with and, make sure the checks and balances are there. Because, for example, if there's a filter in the vapor extraction unit that's not being changed out in appropriate timeframes and that filter's full, well, then contaminants can bypass the system. And so there's things that, you have to make sure are being done in appropriate time to see that the system is successful. Okay, and then the 5-year review. So the 5-year review is scheduled to take place in 2021. That's where they're going to take another look at the extent of groundwater contamination, assess if the soil vapor extraction system is in fact being successful, if it is not only extracting the vapors that are in the soils and the materials beneath our ground surface, but if it is also extracting those vapors from the groundwater. And so we'll see about that, but they have to assess how that system is working, what types of contamination that are here, is it affecting, is it improving? And so they will also be assessing if this water restriction is successful. It's not. We know that it's not. And so it's incredibly important for us to continue our advocacy with the agency for all of our community members, all of y'all, to continue, signing the letters that we host on our website and ask for you guys to sign. Every few months, we update these letters depending on what we're working on with this site. And so it's so important that people continue to use their voice and voice concerns to the agency, because the 5-year review is a pretty critical period. We want to make sure everything's getting looked at. We want to make sure that they're not missing anything that they could be looking at. And so when I inquired about, what exactly was going to be done about groundwater wells being drilled in the area, I said, this restriction is not working. People are unknowingly being exposed because entities are coming in and they're drilling new groundwater wells, and they have been. It's nothing new if you talk to people who live in the restricted area. And the EPA has been working with our state environmental entity, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, as well as the entity that well drillers are supposed to register wells with. And so those three entities are all in part responsible to a certain extent to oversee this restriction. And so, I'm sorry, also Harris County Engineers Department is also involved in this. And so there will be a conclusion in the 5-year review about the efficacy of this restriction and what the plan forward is. So we know it's not working. So let's see what they say they're going to do about it. And let's make sure that we're raising our voices and that we're letting them know, hey, my background's in geology. We have, scientists and other geologists, technical experts on our team and on our board of directors. Here's what our experts are saying would be helpful, or maybe they've seen be successful in other areas with this type of contamination or needing to restrict, groundwater use. So we'll definitely be making suggestions and, hope that those will be considered in the writing of this 5-year review, which we will find out those conclusions and outcomes in 2022. So the work, the boots on the ground, the sampling, the analysis, the deeper dive into all these items will take place in 2021, and the 5-year review itself will come out in 2022. Now I'm going to go a little bit deeper and talk about each of these 2 points. All right, so I mentioned the SVE system, or the soil vapor extraction system. And what you were looking at here is an overview of, this is from an engineering report, an overview of the shopping center. So in 1988, this corner unit started dumping their dry cleaning chemicals out back. And they continued doing that, or sometimes just dumping them down the stormwater drain until 2002. So 1988 to 2002. So what was constructed and what started operating, as I mentioned, in 2019, is this system right here, which is to the east side of the shopping center. And it's behind a fence. You can drive right down the road and see it. And that's where all of the filtration takes place. So all of these little triangles are points where they drilled in around this hottest spot of underground vapors and put all of this piping in. It was a major effort. If you saw the parking lot tore up, that's probably what was going on in the last several years. And so basically all of this piping transports the vapors over here to the back east side of the shopping unit and goes through that filtration process. And then the air should be, by design, in theory, clean enough to be released back up into the ambient air, the outdoor air. This is what it looks like to the left, a chain link. You see the chain link fence. That's what it would look like if you drove by. And then here to the right, you can see it's a complex system, inside of that container, where it has all of these different filters where all of those different casings come to. And so this is, like I said, the inside of the SVE unit. All right. Okay, so according to the EPA, a 5-year review is generally required by CERCLA, which is the Superfund law, or a program policy when hazardous substances remain on site above levels that permit unlimited use and unrestricted exposures. So essentially, a 5-year review is required under Superfund when the site's not cleaned up, when there are still contaminants on the site in the area that people or our resources like our groundwater could potentially be exposed to, and those sites still are in the process of trying to be cleaned up. Now, this Superfund site was listed first with the state in 2003. So this site has been a Superfund site for about 17 years. It is not uncommon to see Superfund sites take 20 to 30 years to get cleaned up. That is the typical timeline, and even that, sometimes within 30 years you don't see adequate cleanups. And that's part of why we do the work that we do, because the site we work with on the east side, the San Jacinto River waste pits, we have seen that combining strategic science, media exposure, and community engagement and organizing, you can actually move these sites forward a lot quicker. We moved that Superfund site through the Superfund process in less than 10 years, not all the way through, but from, discovering the site to coming up with a plan to clean up in less than 10 years. And it's really a marathon pace, for the Superfund process. And so it's why part of the reason why we work on additional Superfund sites. It's just, it's not okay with me that sites are languishing in our communities and impacting our environment, impacting our health, our animals' health. And it's all because a company or someone or an entity dumped these products typically decades prior and didn't clean it up right, didn't handle their materials right. And so I want to see THEA clean these Superfund sites up, and there's over 24 of them in Harris County, so there's no shortage of need, that's for sure. Okay, the last point here about 5 reviews. 5-year reviews provide an opportunity to evaluate the implementation and performance of a remedy to determine whether it remains protective of human health and the environment. So the element there that I'll harken back to is the restriction on groundwater wells. That was part of the remedy for this site was, okay, there are neighborhoods above this plume of contamination and they're on groundwater wells. Let's offer them to get off groundwater wells, which about 50% of the neighborhoods accepted, and about 50% are still on groundwater wells. So, okay, then let's restrict any new wells from being drilled so that people moving to the area or people who may have lived in the area and want a new well cannot access a new well into the contaminated groundwater. Well, that's great, but only in theory. In reality, it's not being effective. So that's something, like I said, we'll definitely be leaning hard on in this 5-year review. So our top concerns at THEA: are there routes of exposure? Are people right now, today, being exposed? It's very difficult to figure out, especially with these types of chemicals, because they could be emitting from the ground into the air in one moment, and maybe 2 hours later, you come with sampling equipment and you sample the air, and they're not emitting at that exact time. And so you don't get a reading, and you might assume, nope, everything's fine. So the sampling is a little tricky, but also you find, especially with sites that it's federal tax dollars and not the polluter paying to clean up, you find that you see things that are missed and things that are overlooked. And so it's a top concern of ours, making sure that there are not routes of exposure that are being missed or overlooked. Another example of that is the indoor air quality at the shopping center. Only 3 of the units, those first 3 units, have been sampled for their indoor air quality. They had unsafe levels. Action was taken to remedy that, but the rest of the shopping center wasn't sampled. So we're really concerned about that. Another is the extent of the groundwater contamination. Has it in fact made its way to 1960? If it has, is that where it stops? Is it further south? And figuring out what the extent of contamination is, so that 1, it can be addressed in the cleanup, and 2, people can be made aware of this. There are tons of groundwater wells in the area. People need to be aware if they are living on top of a plume, working on top of a plume, or pulling water from groundwater that is known to be contaminated. And the interactions with the vapors going into the air is absolutely another top concern, and that's for both indoor air and outdoor air. I mentioned a moment ago how about half of the people within the restricted area opted to go on the option for public water, and about half opted not to. So within this restricted area, the parcels that you're seeing in blue opted to take the EPA's offer and cap their well and go on a public water line. The parcels you see in orange, and again, this is mixed use, right? We don't have zoning. So it's like you could have a church on one property and a residential home on the other. So the ones in orange that you see here are parcels that are still on groundwater wells. The ones that are just a simple Google Earth, greenery, those are no response. So it's very likely that those two are on groundwater wells. They're definitely not on the city water infrastructure. They just did not respond and decline the agency's request. So you can see here, there's definitely a lot of potential for parcels of land to come in contact, with these contaminants. Over time, we have understood the plume, which is outlined in this blue line. I know it's super arbitrary, but this is the Superfund site here, this black L. Over time, we've understood that this blue outline is where the underground plume is. But this has not been updated in some time. And so that's another thing that we've been asking for. And it might be one of those things where the agency's not willing to do it. We might just have to do it ourselves. And so, that would be a big underhaul or a big undertaking for a small nonprofit like ours to, one, collect and decipher all of the groundwater data through time that there is, and then plot all of that in a geographic information system. It's definitely doable. Geographic information systems, or GIS, is fascinating what the capabilities are. But I think it would be most appropriate, if the EPA, if the governing body over this issue would provide us with an updated map of where this plume is. People deserve to know. So unfortunately, you find, though, oftentimes filling those gaps does fall on small nonprofits like THEA. And so anyways, this is showing right here, this is the 1100 block of Jones Road. So historically, it's been understood to dip just down into the 1100 block of Jones Road. Okay, so in 2021, we have two primary items that we will continue within that I wanted to mention, aside from the technical items I've mentioned in this presentation so far. First is continuing with public outreach. In 2020, we have had our volunteers place yard signs. Thank you, volunteers. We've also had our volunteers go door to door, and even in the pandemic, and everybody felt okay, and it was successful. And so we had great outreach events. We have had great success from our volunteers being out in the community, from our volunteers putting out these signs, and new people joining our meetings, contacting the organization, and finding out valuable and really critical information of what's actually going on in the local area, whether it's regarded to people's health and what appears to be, abnormal rates of leukemia, not only in children. We know leukemia is at an abnormal rate in children in the area, but also adults, animals, so finding out what's really going on with the community's health. So in order to do that, we have to have outreach, right? We have to be talking with folks in the area. We have to hear stories, understand what's going on, talk to people about their health, collect health surveys. And so we'll absolutely be continuing our public health and education, our outreach when it comes to public health, as well as the technical items and updates with the Superfund site. I don't know when the EPA is going to step back in and start coming publicly. And they don't do Zooms like we do. And so for 2020, you know, we were the only outlet for the public finding updated information to this frequently. And so we'll definitely continue our meeting regiment about every 6 weeks. And then in between that, we have a town hall. Our first town hall will be the first week of January. I believe it's January 5th. And so if there's any updates between now and then, we'll definitely be presenting them at that town hall. And then also something new that I'm very excited about is a partnership that we have with UTMB, the University of Texas Medical Branch, and Baylor College of Medicine. And so we are currently in a partnership with those two universities, and one of them actually has a center that is devoted to Superfund research and the interaction between contaminants in the environment and public health, and that's specifically contaminants from historical Superfund sites. And then the other university has the Gulf Coast Center for Precision Environmental Health, and they are very interested in how vapors and contaminants that are in our air impact our health, particularly maternal health, women of childbearing age, pregnant women, and our children. And so we are currently working with them on putting together an event for the community around Jones Road it's probably going to be in the end of February. So we're in the early planning stages right now, and we are dreaming, we are setting goals, and we are saying like, hey, we need, you know, some groundwater testing, we need air monitoring. It'd be really awesome if we could also do biomonitoring. And we're working with them to find toxicologists, inhalation experts, and, you know, different experts that can satisfy all of these areas where we believe there are gaps in what the EPA is looking at. And we believe there are gaps that need to be looked at to see if, in fact, people are being exposed. And so I'm really excited about this opportunity. They have a mobile medical unit, and they also have these polymer wristbands, think like the Livestrong wristbands, that you can actually wear for like a week, and you wear them all the time. And if there were contaminants in the air or contaminants in the water, they're going to get caught in that wristband if it comes in contact with contaminants in the air or contaminants in the water, as well as things you excrete. Like we've done this before with another community, and they were finding a lot of like tobacco and caffeine, and people, and that's how I learned that tobacco and caffeine are actually excreted through your skin. And so if you're excreting certain chemicals or things, it will pick that up as well. And so it's a really good way of this biomonitoring, right? Like looking actually at what humans themselves have in their bodies, whether it's the wristband, whether it's, you know, a urine analysis or a blood sample, but actually looking at what humans have is a really good way at assessing if in fact exposure is going on in a geographic area. Because like I said, right, vapors could be coming up at one moment, and if you're not sampling at that moment, you might not think vapors are coming up. But the person who lives in that home, who visits that property, who works at that spot, could be exposed at various points through time. And so if you are able to look at their, you know, different things that whether they excrete, their blood, their urine, what have you, then it's more of a consistent way to see what in fact this person could have come in contact with. So I'm really, really excited about this opportunity. Please, as always, if you have concerns that, you know, you think there's something being overlooked, if you have any health concerns about your water, your air, your soil, please feel free to bring those to us. Like I said, we're in the early stages of planning a really great and hopefully large event for the community. Of course, there will be a virtual component. We're still working through all of that. I know those of us, like myself, that are more of the vulnerable population are, you know, still being very, very careful. And I know most people are. So we definitely want to be sensitive to the times and to making sure we're protecting everybody. So for us, I'm really excited about the items we're going to be able to bring to you, the resources, the materials in 2021. I thank you all for joining us this evening. And now I will stop sharing my screen, and then I will go ahead and open up all of the lines. In the event that anyone has questions or comments, and if my team could let me know if there's anything in the chat. Okay, awesome. Thank you. I see that one of our team members has dropped our community health survey in the chat. Please take a moment. I see your question there, Mr. Caligari. Thank you. Please take a moment, if you have not, to fill out the health survey. We host this health survey. It is confidential, and it essentially allows us to better advocate, to better partner, whether it be with the state health department or a university, to try to get a clear picture of what the community's health is. Okay, so now to address your question, why do you call it a Superfund site? Good question. So a Superfund site is a toxic abandoned waste site. And so it is essentially a site that was created by the improper disposal or dumping of toxic chemicals. And it is put under a federal program for cleanup, meaning it is threatening the environment and or public health, and something has to be done to clean up the site. And so it's a federal program called Superfund. The concept actually started just how it sounds in 1980, and it was a super fund. It was a large fund of money to go towards cleaning up these sites. A lot of them were created pre-EPA. So a lot of them were created before we had the laws and regulations that we have today. And now, you know, they, starting in 1980, they had to figure out a way for our government to handle all of these Superfund sites. There are over 1,800 federal Superfund sites within our nation, and there are also state Superfund sites in some states. Texas is one that has state Superfund sites also that are under state oversight. All right, so someone was asking if you sign up to, and thank you, Patsy. If you sign up to volunteer on the website, you can absolutely contact us via the website, certainly. And Becky, if you will drop my email address here in the chat, and you can also feel free to email me. I would love for y'all to volunteer. We're definitely going to need some volunteers in 2021, so thank you for asking. Okay, so great question. How did they find out about this site in particular? So there was a gymnastics facility southeast of the Superfund site. And it was also, I believe, a daycare. And they tested their drinking water fountain. This was in 2002, I believe. The gymnastics facility decided for some reason to test their drinking water, and they found PERC. They found this chemical compound that comes from dry cleaning solvents, and they alerted the authorities, and from there they started tracing and started getting higher concentrations, and that's when the Superfund site was discovered. And the EPA has done a ton of investigatory work on who took place in this dumping, what companies were involved, who had what ownership. And I mean, and then even the company, when say there was this company who did the dumping. It was the dry cleaner that was there from 88 to 02 in the corner unit of that shopping center where halal meat was for some time. That dry cleaner would go out back for all these years and just dump their solvents. And they did that. And when the EPA went after them to attempt to hold them liable for the cost of this cleanup, they actually went after the manufacturer. And so it has a bit of interesting, legal and discovery background, if you will. But yeah, essentially it was discovered because of that gymnastics facility. Okay. Let's see. Paul Morgan, did you have a question?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, we're going to be working here. I'm not sure about the question about we are going to be working near wells. If you could elaborate on that, I would love that. Another question is, what is the guesstimate as far as how far the plume has reached? I understand the official boundary, but wondering how far out the testing went. Okay, so let me share my screen. And let me go to the map with the monitoring wells. Bear with me as I zoom through all this. Okay, so this street you see here is 1960. And so the bulk of testing has gone on solely where these monitoring wells are. There are more monitoring wells within this area. They're not on this map, but this is a good map to show you the extent, right? So going from here, from monitoring well 14, down, and then across here to monitoring well 19, which hits just north of 1960. And so this is still a ways south of Cypress, North Houston, to give you an indication of, the north and south extent. The plume is expected to be between 1960 and Cypress, North Houston. And they did not test beyond that. And so if there is contamination beyond that, they would not suspect that it was from this polluting source, but potentially another polluting source. And so I know there's plenty of people to the north and just beyond this area that are greatly concerned, about public health, about potential exposures, about their water. And we have tried to get the EPA to test their groundwater wells, and they have consistently declined because they are outside of this area that the agency believes the plume is contained within. Now, this map here showing the historical location of the groundwater plume, sorry, but that's not good enough for me. I want to see an updated map. And so that's something, that we have to continue advocating to the agency, that we need updated maps. Like, we need to know where now people could be potentially getting exposed to this. There's homes, there's apartments, there's businesses, all of which could be on groundwater wells. All right, let's see. I'm trying to get back to the questions. Okay. Okay, so did the dumpers get a fine? So good question. So the company who did the dumping did pay, I believe it was just over $100,000. So this cleanup effort has surpassed $2 million in expenses. So the polluter in the early years gave I believe just over $100,000, and then they filed bankruptcy. So they no longer were a viable entity for the EPA to go after, for them to fund the actual cleanup efforts. Okay, do volunteers need to go test each well? So the wells, that is so we don't necessarily have access to the monitoring wells. And so the EPA is the one that periodically tests the groundwater in the monitoring wells. And then they also have offered to continue testing residential wells within this area. So if you are someone or you know someone who lives in this area or has a business in this area that has a groundwater well and they want the EPA to test their well, the EPA will test their groundwater well for these contaminants. It just has to be within this area. You know, when we talk about bathing in the water versus drinking, great question. You know, okay, if it's not safe to drink it, well, what about bathing in it? Some contaminants can be absorbed through your skin, and these are contaminants that can come through in more than one way, right? So they can come through as a particle in the water, or they can come through as a gas. And so, you know, not only could you potentially ingest these contaminants, you could potentially inhale them as well. And you essentially will typically absorb more water into your body from a shower than you could drink in a day. So, great question. It's really important that we are thinking about different ways to be exposed, because oftentimes people will say, well, you know, we'll inform them about contamination in an area, or it's theirs or another area, and they'll say, oh, well, I drink bottled water. Oh, well, good thing. I don't drink it. Well, you bathe in it. You probably cook with it. You wash your clothes in it. It goes through your water heater, your dishwasher. You probably wash your hands in it. And so there are these other ways, you know, that we use our water. There's so many ways we use our water for everything. And so it's definitely important that we're thinking about these ways. If you're interested in testing your water, we could definitely inquire with the EPA. I would absolutely do that. When it comes to testing, off the top of my head, I'm not sure the cost. There's a lab that we recommend, which I'd be happy to talk with you more about offline. There's a lab that it's very highly accredited, very reputable, does not have violations in these areas. And so, and they make it very easy on you. They'll send you the test kits. And if someone were to decide on their own to test their well, I would be happy to help. However, in the Houston region, in our petrochemical complex, we manufacture over 80,000 different chemical compounds. So how do you determine only what to test for? You, for example, might only test for perc, but you could have vinyl chloride, or you could have benzene, or another one of these tens of thousands of chemicals. So I feel like testing can sometimes give people a false sense of security, because it's really, really expensive to get a completely inclusive test. So it's difficult to say, you know, about testing, but if you have a specific idea, like perc, like the related chemicals that you're interested in testing, and have the means to do so, I would be happy to help navigate you through that process and help you understand kind of what the results mean, what the data means. But if you're anywhere in the area, I would first and foremost definitely want to say, let's see if the EPA could do it. It does not hurt to inquire, that's for sure. All right, let's see. What will it take? Good question. What will it take to test outside of the Plume towards Eldridge? There's lots of sick people. So first and foremost, we need people in these areas that have concerns about health to fill out our health surveys, because we are mapping these illnesses and diseases that come in our health surveys. I'll be presenting y'all our map next year, and we need to be receiving that information, because there's no database that has that information in real time. What's happening today? What are people sick with today? The Texas Cancer Registry lags years behind in data. And so if we could demonstrate, you know, what we believe to be an abnormal rate of illness, then, you know, we could work with Texas Department of State Health Services, have them potentially confirm it or disprove it, and go take steps from there. In terms from what would it take for testing to take place outside of the plume for these contaminants. I am looking just how far the extent of that line is. Essentially, we would need to find data points to the western edge or to the outside edge, whether that's north or west or what have you, that we're finding concerning levels. For example, what I mentioned about what we found in the data for vinyl chloride down at 1960, that's really concerning. And so when we find concerning data like that, then you look at, okay, here at this spot, contamination was found. All right, EPA, did you go below that? Did you go in the direction beyond that of groundwater flow to test, to see? And to make sure you came up non-detect, to make sure you went beyond that location where you found it, go beyond it and make sure you don't find it anymore. And so we would need to see something like that in the data to be able to make an argument for the need to go beyond where the agency has been willing to go. I would show y'all the data, but it's like it is, we literally had to get magnifying glasses. I mean, it is teeny tiny writing, even on a big screen. And you blow it up, it's a lot. And so, like I said, we have over 400 pages of or not even pages, thousands of pages, but over 400 documents that we're weeding through right now. And we are absolutely looking at where these wells are and what their data points are in the most recent sampling, which was 2020, and then the sampling through time. I think the earliest data we've seen so far goes back to 2006. So we're starting with the most recent sampling that we've found in there, the 2020 sampling, and we're working our way back through time. And we'll be looking for indicative data that could potentially say, EPA, I don't think you did your due diligence. I don't think you went far enough. And support the apparent need. A very wise woman, Lois Gibbs, who was the driving force behind Superfund actually becoming a thing, and Superfund actually, the cleanups for the first site that needed cleanup to take place. And so Lois says, that she doesn't often advise people to move when they find out they live near a Superfund site, because about 10 million people live, I think it is about 10 million people live within 3 miles of a Superfund site in the United States. So if you find out you live near a Superfund site and you move, the odds are pretty good that the community you move to is going to have another Superfund site. Might not, there's always that possibility, of course, but the odds are that there could be a Superfund site near there. So sometimes when you move from one area that's a problem, you might move to another, as I know some of you all know too well. All right, folks, one of the housekeeping items was be respectful. I always want to be respectful of your time. It is almost 6:30, which is our scheduled end time. And I want to thank all of you for being here this evening with us, for your engagement and your participation. One of the most important things you can do is take something you learned tonight and share it with a neighbor, share it with a friend. Talk about this issue. The more we talk about it, the more awareness that raises and the greater change we can create. So thank you again. I hope you all have a lovely holiday season. And unless something emergency pops up with this site, we will see you all in the new year. Thank you. Good night.